Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Ahead of the Dutch Grand Prix, Mercedes have explained their disappointing weekend back at Spa, especially the potential damage to Lewis Hamilton's car, but also the damage to Hamilton himself. A 45G vertical impact apparently, lots to discuss today. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you are new as always. Again, like 100 new subs yesterday, love to see it, not far off 8k at all. Firstly, this is pretty funny. Haas, I guess, are clearly reaching the budget cap rather too quickly because they're now releasing this as merchandise, but thought it was pretty funny to be fair. That's now on the market. A couple of things on the driver market because, yes, further indications that Gasly to Alpine could be a realistic possibility. That I'm sure is where Gasly wants to go. Whether Alpine want him, who knows? The key targets apparently are Mick Schumacher, Gasly, Daniel Ricciardo would make sense, but not many people are really talking about him anymore in that context, so I suppose we'll see on that one. But of course, if Gasly was to go to Alpine, and AlphaTauri have said, or the Red Bull kind of system have said, that if he does get an offer from Alpine, they will come to an arrangement where he can leave AlphaTauri and go to Alpine. Now, if he does leave, apparently they're looking into potentially Colton Herta, who was a name actually linked to the McLaren F1 project a few months ago, and now he's getting linked to the AlphaTauri seat. And seemingly this has some credence because the FIA are now looking into him and seeing whether he can qualify for this FIA super license or whatever he needs to actually take this deal. So just the fact that the FIA are looking into this, are looking into his credentials to figure out whether it's possible for him to go from the IndyCar to Formula 1, and you'd imagine it would be somewhere or another, then that probably indicates that at least this is potentially on the table, that Gasly to Alpine and then Colton Herta, American driver, to AlphaTauri could be possible as well. So definitely want to stay tuned for, and we do expect more details in the coming days on the Piastri situation. We expect, of course, McLaren to be able to lock down Piastri, but there is a bit of a contract fiasco going on over there right now, where probably Alpine, it's not like they want to get Piastri back and force him to drive for them. It's probably more like they want some money in return for the development that they gave to Piastri the last several years. They probably want a good 5, 10, whatever million dollars in compensation for like developing Piastri, and now he's left, based on whatever the contracts say. We'll see if it comes to anything, but I think we can expect over the coming days McLaren to probably confirm Piastri as their driver if everything is resolved. If he can't for whatever reason, there are of course other options. Even Alex Palou, an IndyCar guy that Zach Brown wants to put in a Formula 1 car, is also on the cards as well. So we shall see about that one as time progresses, but I thought I would keep you guys updated. Let's talk Mercedes then. I thought it was interesting to see that Hamilton, the most DNFs he's ever had in his career, has actually been at Spa with 5. Monza not too far behind. We go there of course in just a couple of weeks time. Just to mention also potential more bad news here for Mercedes, that next season their current front wing design, a new innovation they brought to Canada, will no longer be allowed. This, I believe, the kind of the piece on the end plates here, which creates more outwash than the FIA intended. So the idea is with these new regulations, everything has to be quite sleek, such that, I mean, if you look at last year's cars, they're so boxy that all the airflow that comes off the back of the car is so disturbed that a car behind can't really work that air with its aero the same way that it would usually be able to. Therefore, it generates much less downforce than it can in clean air. Therefore, it's very difficult to follow cars through corners, and that's the dirty air effect. The idea is that these year's cars are much smoother effectively through the air. They generate a lot of their downforce through the ground effect, and they push a lot of the airflow up behind the car rather than back to the car behind. Therefore, it should work better. Now, I think this front wing, it kind of creates more outwash than was intended by the regulations, and therefore it's no longer going to be allowed next year. So this complex design that has been introduced by Mercedes back in Canada, that will not be allowed next season. So there probably are bigger problems for Mercedes, but not an ideal one, that the FIA is saying, yeah, you know, your front wing is quite nice, but we're not going to allow it next year because it probably creates marginally too much dirty air than we would like to see. Now, George Russell was relatively surprised, in a good way, I suppose, for him, about their performance in the race compared to their qualifying performance at Spa. So they still have way more in the tank in race pace than they do in quali, but he couldn't quite overhaul Sainz to the ends, and there was an interesting explanation I'll share for you guys here in a second from the Mercedes guys as to why that was the case, because he was closing out rapidly, and I think we've seen in previous seasons that are often like cars will close up quickly, like a second a lap for a few laps behind a car, and then they get to within like a second, 2 seconds, and they can't make any further progress. Now, we saw a similar effect actually here in Spa for apparently similar reasons, but the big story really, of course, was the Hamilton-Alonso crash. This I thought was pretty funny from Hamilton. He gives like a hat with to Fernando on it, to Alonso himself to Fernando here with a bit of a signature going on. So trying to, I guess, give him a present. I don't really think he's taken a dig at him here. I just think he's trying to say sorry in some way or another to Fernando for the incident this weekend, of course, giving Alonso really no room. This, of course, was the result. A rather spectacular incident, but not a good one for Hamilton to suffer. His spine has definitely been taking a beating in that Mercedes car these last few months. And this, of course, when he crashes down here, it's not a pretty impact at all. He said after the impact it was a very painful one indeed, but I'll share what the Mercedes guys themselves had to say on this. Of course, James Voles was kind of doing the explanation on car damage, especially saying that yes, Lewis was definitely, well, not exactly hurt necessarily in the long term, will be okay for Zandvoort, but yeah, the 45G vertical impact, but also talk about the car damage, saying that the leaking of coolant and the high temperatures might well cause issues going into next weekend.
It was a large impact. It was measured at 45G on the SDR recorder in the car, which is very big on a vertical load. He'll be okay. He'll be back in Zandvoort fighting. I think primarily for him, he's frustrated that he had a very fast race car and a podium was possible. But he, like all of us, are here to fight and continue moving forward. What was the extent of the damage to Lewis's car? There's enough photos floating around the internet to show just how high the car was and how it landed, and the impact was large. What we noticed almost immediately after the impact on the ground was a loss of coolant. You can actually see on the onboard of Alonso that coolant really just flying out towards him, and then you started to see temperatures rise fairly quickly, and that was the primary reason for stopping him on track. It will now take a few days to review all the components. Clearly, there's going to be overloads through suspension components and gearboxes, and we need to make sure we understand the full extent of what's required before Zandvoort.
So Hamilton did say immediately after the incident, right, I almost broke my back coming down, and it turns out, yeah, 45 Gs of vertical impact. Like, that is, I mean, we see numbers similar to that quite often with relatively high-speed crashes into barriers and the like. I think, I don't know what Zhou's crash was. It probably wasn't maybe quite that high, just because, like, at Zhou's crash, he was getting slowed down, but this is at Silverstone, by the gravel, so by the time he hit the wall, it was probably less, but often you'll see numbers like that for, you know, an absolute fraction of a second, right? And that would have been the same thing here, of course, when Hamilton's car hit the ground. Now, at the same time, like, that is not the direction where you want that impact to be. Like, okay, 45 Gs for a fraction of a second into a wall is obviously also not great at all, but at least your body can move forward with that impact and then backwards again. Whereas if it's like a vertical impact, that force is just getting absorbed solely by your spine, right? Your body just gets crushed effectively. So, I mean, yeah, not ideal at all for Hamilton. That's why he mentions here that he could have honestly been far worse. You know, he could have suffered a serious injury here as a result of this, and he got away lightly, I think, that he feels. And of course, you know, it's not like it was Alonso's fault or anything, the incident, but yeah, I'm sure he thinks, let's make sure that doesn't happen again, because it could have been a bad one, right? And it was, you know, obviously, and it sort of looks pretty tame in the moment, but when you think how fast these cars are going and how little protection the drivers have from that type of impact, it was obviously not a great one at all. Now, of course, the other side of this is for Hamilton is his kind of components in the car. We know that, as they said, well, as Voles said right there in that clip, that yeah, the coolant was leaking out, therefore parts of the engine were not getting the cooling they needed, the temperatures were skyrocketing, and therefore they told Hamilton to stop the car. This is not going to be okay. Now, the gearbox, they actually have plenty in reserve. So this is thanks to Formula News Live keeping track of this. So the numbers here basically mean that there's well, if it's orange, that's the amount that you're allowed per season. To energy store, you're allowed 2. Control electronics, you're allowed 2. So pretty much every team is on their last and final one at that point. Now, it's pretty funny really just comparing this, because Mercedes generally, all the teams powered by Mercedes, with the exception of Norris, have very good reliability, right? They've barely taken any unnecessary penalties at all, apart from on Norris's car. Whereas if you look down to, you know, Ferrari, I mean, it's just all red pretty much, apart from the exhaust, which apparently you're allowed loads of them. Even Charles Leclerc's managed to take 9 exhaust, and most of the Mercedes cars only have 3, but I mean, even Red Bull are falling into this trap as well. Fair play to Perez only needing 1 energy store so far. That's kind of surprising, but I mean, that's like battery and stuff like that. And then Renault, of course, as well, also taking penalties. So impressive from Mercedes to a degree, but of course, this does mean that Hamilton, I'm pretty sure, just put in a new ICE, new internal combustion engine into his car for Belgium, and it now may be damaged. It may not be damaged. The gearbox, even if it is damaged, should be fine, because he's only used 2 so far. So so he's got another couple of gearboxes in reserve, so that shouldn't be an issue. It's the ICE that's a big deal. Now, of course, you don't want to take the penalty in Zandvoort because overtaking is so difficult. That's not where you want to take a penalty if it is damaged. What they would probably do is go back to his like seconds engine for Zandvoort and then put a new one in for Monza maybe. I don't know what they'll do exactly, but yeah, definitely still a concern. Vols was indicating that, yeah, it might not be great, but he hasn't said by any means that like it's broken or anything, guaranteed. So probably it might be okay. We shall see on that one. And of course, Hamilton also confirms that, well, at least the team confirms that he's okay and good to go for next weekend's. So that, of course, is good news all around. The other thing that I did want to mention here, just because, you know, Giuliano De Kessa kind of puts it into Italian, but he went on to explain that they were getting like a second a lap to Sainz, but when they got within the 2-second window, and like I think really, obviously Russell was pushing very hard on those tyres to get to the point where like he would actually be able to be close to Sainz to maybe pass him. When he got to 2 seconds down, that's where you start to get a little bit, not as much anymore, but you start to get some of the dirty air effect. And as soon as that happens, like that was really affecting his tyre performance, and he got to like the 2-second point and then really couldn't gain any further time, especially because the Mercedes went for a setup where they were you know, very fast in sector 2 relative to Ferrari with a higher downforce setting rear wing. That should have been better for their tyre life than Ferrari had, proved to be the case in the race. As it turned out though, with the higher downforce rear wing, more drag in the straights, didn't have the straight line performance to really attack or defend particularly well, and therefore Sainz was able to stay ahead. But interesting really to hear that when they got within 2 seconds of the car ahead, like this is the specific tweet, they started losing a little bit of downforce, and then all of a sudden the degradation went up and Russell didn't have enough rubber to attack. So kind of a similar story that we have seen frankly in previous years. But I mean, yeah, of course, Toto Wolff getting ready to go. He basically said they've been working hard to understand what went wrong and trying to adapt those learnings for next weekend. But of course, there's only a couple of days away, and I've just got to say that the press conference scheduling people certainly know what they're doing here, because the press conference on Thursday has Alonso and Hamilton in the same one. So I'm sure questions might be flying around, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care, and I'll see you next time.